Hey, 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 welcome back. In part four of chapter five, we dive into one of the most essential teachings of becoming supernatural, which is elevated emotions. I know you guys have heard me say this in all my TikTok videos and all the content surrounding these readings and this book read along. But Dr. Joe explains that when we pair a clear intention with elevated emotions like gratitude, joy, love, wholeness, we begin to signal to the body that the future is already here. And that's what Neville teaches when he tells us to live in the end. That's what Abraham Hicks tells us when tell us to tune into the potential. These elevated emotions are like activators. They're what take us out of survival and place us into the creation mode. And when you start feeling the future before it arrives, the quantum field begins rearranging reality to match your signal. So you literally become magnetized to that future that you are already embodying. Let's get into part five. I'm sorry, part four of chapter five. Embracing elevated emotions. You've just read how the breathing exercise in this chapter pulls the mind out of the body as it liberates stored energy from the first three energy centers, the centers of survival. Once you do that, it's time to recondition the body to a new mind, the second part of the meditation, which involves attaining elevated emotional states. I want to clarify here why embracing elevated emotions is so powerful. As you've learned from our discussion about genes in the second chapter, we now know that it's the environment that signals the gene, not the other way around. If an emotion is the end product of an experience in the environment, it is the emotion that turns the gene expression on or off. So, yes, your emotions influence your genes. He says, when you embrace these elevated emotions in this meditation, what you're actually doing is signaling your genes ahead of the environment. The body doesn't know the difference between an emotion created by an experience you're actually having in the outside environment and an experience you're creating internally by embracing this new elevated emotion. So when you embrace that elevated emotion and think thoughts that are greater than the self-limiting ones that kept you stuck in the past, your body begins to prepare chemically for the future because it thinks that the future is happening when? Now. In other words, if you do the meditation correctly enough times, the body responds as though the healing or any condition you are manifesting in your environment has already taken place. These elevated emotions have a higher and faster frequency than more base emotions like guilt, fear, jealousy, or anger. And since all frequency carries information, when we change the frequency, we change our energy. That new energy can then carry new information and a new consciousness or set of intentions or thoughts. The more elevated the emotion, the faster the frequency, and the more you feel like energy instead of matter, and the more energy becomes available to create more coherent energy field, shifting further away from disease and more towards health, or for that matter, towards signaling any gene. When your emotions are self limiting, on the other hand, they have lower frequency and you feel more like matter instead of energy. And then it takes more time to create change in your life. Here's an example. If at some point in your past you were shocked, betrayed, or traumatized by an event with a high emotional charge that has left you feeling pain or sadness or fear, the chances are that experience has been branded into your biology in numerous ways. It's also possible that the genes that were activated by this experience might keep your body from healing. So, in order for you to change your body into a new genetic expression, the inner emotion you create has to be greater than the emotion from the past outer experience. The energy of your empowerment or your amplitude of your inspiration must be greater than your pain or sadness. Now you are changing your inner environment of the body, which is the outer environment of the cell. The genes for health can be upregulated while the genes for disease can be downregulated. The more profound the emotion, the louder you're knocking on the genetic door And the more you're going to signal those genes to change the structure and function of your body. That's how it works. This is how people are healing themselves in this community. They are getting miraculous results that doctors and scientists cannot understand. And that's why they're starting to show up at Dr. Joe's workshops. Mhm. We can actually prove this because in one of the 2017 advanced workshops in Tampa, we measured gene expression in a randomized selection of 30 workshop participants. The results showed that our students were able to significantly change the expression of 8 genes over the course of a 4-day workshop by changing their internal states. There is only one possibility in 20 that the results were due to chance. There's only one possibility in 20 that the results were due to chance. That's the threshold of significance that statisticians usually use. The function of these genes are far ranging. They're involved in neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons in response to novel experiences and learning, protecting the body against various influences that tend to age cells, regulating cell repair, including the ability to move stem cells to those sites in the body where they're needed to repair damaged or aging tissue, building cellular structures, especially the cytoskeleton, the framework of rigid molecules that give our cells shape and form, eliminating free radicals, and so decreasing oxidative stress associated with aging and many major health conditions, and helping our bodies identify and eliminate cancerous cells, thereby suppressing the growth of cancer tumors. Activating the genes of neurogenesis was particularly significant because most of the time our students were in meditation. They were so present in their inner world of imagination that their brains believed they were in the actual event. See figure 5.15 below to learn what each of these genes does and why it's important for our health. So, you guys, he has a chart here. Hold on. Sorry. Work with me, y'all. Okay. I think that's a good shot. Screenshot, because I don't know how long I can hold it. But this chart is very important because he shows different genes that are being expressed when you practice elevated emotions and what those genes regulate in the body. So, for example, I'll just read a few of them. CHAC1 regulates the oxidative balance in cells, helping reduce free radicals that cause oxidative stress, the most universal cause of aging, and it helps neural cells form and grow optimally. Um, what is it? KRT24, associated with healthy cell structure, also suppresses certain types of cancer cells, including those found in colorectal cancer. ALS2CL suppresses tumors, especially those contributing to squamous cells carcinoma, a type of skin cancer. So, these different types of genetic expressions, when you practice elevated emotions, are now being created and produced in the body because, again, emotions are chemical reactions. They are helping the body to form different genetic expressions, different hormones that are creating different chemical compounds, aka these things that he has listed here. And our body is basically a pharmacy of its own. And when we learn how to tap into it, we help it produce those super pharmaceuticals that a pharmaceutical company wish they could. How about that? If our students have changed their gene expression by creating elevated emotions in just a few days, imagine what you can do if you practice this meditation for a few weeks. By using this breath technique to release the familiar emotions stored in the body from years of thinking and feeling the same way, and then by emotionally rehearsing new states every day, with practice, these unlimited emotions will become the new normal for you. Your brain will think different thoughts equal to those elevated emotions. Finally, by embracing the unlimited emotions instead of the same limited ones, when you understand that you are signaling new genes and making new proteins that are responsible for the change in structure and function of your body, you can assign more meaning to what you're doing. That leads to greater intention, which creates an even greater outcome. Remember what I said I think it was part one, where I talked about the more you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, it creates more conviction and you understand the how a lot better. And you go at it with a greater intention. And he says here that that greater intention gives you a greater outcome. So it's a scientific fact that we use about 1.5% of our DNA. We use about 1.5% of our DNA. The rest is called junk DNA. There's a principle in biology called endowment. Endowment, in other words, I'm sorry, let me get that back together. There's a specific principle in biology called endowment that holds that nature never wastes anything that is not going to use. In other words, if the junk DNA is there, there must be a reason other than wise. I'm sorry, there must I can't read this chapter. If junk DNA is there, there must be a reason. Otherwise, nature in its infinite wisdom would have evolved it away. Would have basically, nature wouldn't have it being a part of you if it weren't for a reason. He says, because the universal law is if you don't use it, you lose it. So think of your genes as a library of potentials. There are infinite combinations of gene variations that can be expressed in those latent genes. They are waiting for you to activate them. There are genes for an unlimited genius mind, for longevity, for immortality, and for an uncompromising will, for the capacity to heal, for the having mystical experiences, for regeneration of tissues and organs, for activating the hormones of youth so you have greater energy and vitality, for photographic memory, and for doing the uncommon, just to name a few. I'm glad I actually read this part because I did not realize that we only use 1.5% of all of our DNA. That's insane to me, number one. And then that 99.5, what is it, 98.5% of our DNA is considered junk. But nature doesn't make mistakes because why do we, if we didn't need it, we wouldn't have it. Like every species evolves into something that, whatever the earlier species had that it no longer needs, that newer, more modern species doesn't have those things. So it's like interesting to understand this, and I totally agree. When I heard him say this in a podcast, and I also read this, I truly, truly believe that we have the capacity for everything he listed here: the capacity to heal, having mystical experiences, regenerating tissues. There was a woman in a testimonial on his channel where she regrew her rectum tissue because I think she had rectum cancer or something like that, and they had to have that part of her rectum removed. She literally grew it back. And then there was another gentleman who grew back parts of his bone structure in his jaw. I think just of having like not very strong bone matter in his jawline, that he had dental issues. And so he actually regrew his jaw bone and his teeth that were there. And fast forward to now, and I'll talk about this in my live, but I'm sorry I'm going on a tangent. But they're talking about growing teeth back instead of having them pulled in Japan. There's technology and science being backed up to say that we can regrow our teeth back through stem cell, and so I'm fascinated by all of this stuff. Sorry about that. In other words, he says it's all equal to your imagination and creativity. As you signal any of those genes ahead of the environment, your body will express a greater potential by expressing new genes to make new proteins for a greater expression of life. So when I ask you to feel a certain elevated emotion when you recondition the body to a new mind, know that as you embrace each emotion, you are knocking on your own genetic door. So I invite you to surrender to the process and fully engage in the experience. And that wraps up part 4. If you take nothing else from this part of the chapter, I want you to understand this: feeling comes first. Practice gratitude before the blessing lands. Feel the love before the person appears. Radiate wholeness before the healing is confirmed. This is how you become a new energy in the field. And in part 5, we'll explore how we embody all of this through one of Dr. Joe's reconditioning the body to a new mind meditation, which is one of his most powerful tools. I can attest to that. Um, but yeah, guys, it gets better and better every chapter. See you in the next video.